Hello, you beautiful, amazing people of the interwebs. So, some people asked me in a modding community for Farming Simulator 2022 or FS22 to create like a short video, which is going to be hard. So, strap in, it's going to be a lengthy video. But what we're going to be going through here is essentially how to grab, in this case, utility poles from Giants Editor, put them into Blender, and then apply it in Blender so we can use them on top of splines to use them in our custom map afterwards, and then taking the position of the spline of the models, etc., from our custom map and inject them into Giants Editor. So those are going to be the three things that we're going to be looking out for or doing today. And sorry in advance if the video is going to be kind of lengthy. I'm going to do my best to go through it quickly, and then feel free to comment down below if there are any issues and stuff like that that you want me to go through. But let's dive in. So I'm in Giants Editor, and one of the requests I have was utility poles that are on the US, like in general in rural areas of the US in the real world, that they still use utility poles, and how to make them so they, follow the terrain correctly and you won't have to sit there and do everything manually. So first of all, you can model the utility pole yourself and then do stuff like that. But fortunately enough, Giants already created utility poles for the US map in Farming Simulator 2022. So what we're gonna do is go to boot up Giants Editor. I'm using, at the point of making this video, version 9.0.2. So what we're gonna do is go into File, New Mod from Game, and then we're gonna choose map US, as you can see here, and then let's call it tutorial US. Press OK. It's gonna create mod from the game files for us. And here's the thing. You will notice that immediately in the game it's made in a different manner. So we're gonna try and optimize it a little bit and do our best to make it easy. So first of all, this is the Giants Editor. If you clicked on this video, then most likely you're familiar with it already, so I'm not gonna spend too much time on saying what is what. But as you can see here, we have utility poles right here, and there are various renditions of it. There's one here and one here. These would most likely be used at intersections. But what we're going to cover are the main poles, which is these guys right here, the simple ones. So if I click on it, then you see it selects all of those because they're in a group called locked transform group called electrical setup. But if we open this one, right, and then click away and then click on it this time, then it will only select the utility pole 02, which is this one right here that we have selected. So if we expand this one again, then we can choose the pole and the top bar and then also the stabilizer cable. But we're only interested in these two for simplicity's sake. With those two selected, control and select both of them, file, export selection. So what I'm going to do now is just go to one of my tutorial pages here, or folders, my bad, and then just select it, and then we press file, export, and then we select OBJ. You can see I already have some selected. I'm just going to use this one tutorial pole because I had to reshoot this video a couple of times. Thanks, kids. So in case you hear a kid screaming in the background, that's my son playing games with his friends right behind me in the other room. Anyway, so we exported our OBJ. Let's boot up Blender. Voila. At the point, the this point of making this video, I am using Blender version 3.0. And this is how Blender looks. You might be a little bit or very familiar with Blender. If you're not, watch some tutorial videos of basic functionality, how it works. I will enable screencast keys, which are these guys right here. So you can follow along and see the shortcuts I use. But once you boot up Blender minus the screencast keys, this is how it will look. All right. So press N, so you have this shelf open, essentially, your tool shelf. And what we want to check first is make sure Giants Exporter is enabled. I have it enabled right here. If you most likely don't, then go, because it's Blender 3.0, I did find out that it actually works. So go into, first of all, I have it right here, Farming Simulator. And there it is, the one I downloaded from Giants Developer Network. I will put the link down below. So you just download it. When you start it up, don't press install, just press extract files, and then, you know, select a folder where you would like to, let's say desktop, and then i3D exporter, there we go, and then select folder. That's it. They have just got extracted. Goodie. Close it down again, go back into Blender, edit, preferences, then you have add-ons, press install to manually install an add-on to Blender. And then we just go into our desktop, i3D exporter, pick the zip file, install add-on, and then it will appear like this, but disabled. So we just re-enable it, and then you will have it right here. Let me just expand this a little bit. Go into game location right here. So export game location. You can try and press here so it will find the game automatically. If it doesn't, press the folder icon and find wherever your game is installed. Mine, for instance, is through Steam. So Steam, yada, 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 common Farming Simulator. You can see the entire directory here. And just the main folder, select folder, that's it. Material. And these are the shaders. It's especially important when you're creating vehicles, but for the purpose of this tutorial, we're not going to go into that, but I'm just going to press set game shaders right here. And that's all we needed to do. So now Blender is prepped. We extracted our OBJ. So we have it actually situated right here, tutorial poll. That's our OBJ, right? So file, in the top here, import OBJ, and then let's find our polls. Extracted from map US. I already knew where it was just confusing. There we go, tutorial poll. Leave it as this, import OBJ. So here it is. And then you notice, wait, there is no, there is something selected and you can see it up here, but there is no poll. And when you look around, no poll, what the hell? So what you need to do is go into view first of all and set the end clipping distance to just max it out to whatever. We might actually have overdone it. So let's do it like this. There we go. And then you can just barely see it when I move, that it's right there. So what we're gonna do is just have it selected, go up here, while in object mode, there's object and edit mode. Go into object mode, set origin to geometry. Then this dot we had right here vanished. So that means our point of origin is actually on the mesh itself. So we press Shift S and then move our selection to cursor. The cursor is this 3D cursor you see right there. There we go. So what we can do now is just press 1 on the number pad and shift middle mouse button to move around here. And then what we can do is press G to move and then Z to move it on the Z axis. and then we can hold down Control and gradually snap it to the tiny grid blocks. So there we have it. Now it's up top. And if we press item up here, we will see that we moved it 8.8 meters above what it thought was 0, but it isn't. The 0 is actually down here. And it tells us it is already rotated 90 degrees. So if I press 0, it's like, yeah, but it's on the x-axis, right? So, but what we need to do is check if it's rotated correctly here on the z. So if I press R to rotate z on the z-axis, then we can, try and rotate it perfectly, but it just refuses. So what we do is hold down Shift and then gradually rotate it so it covers roughly the green Y axis. There we have it. Perfect. So now what we need to do is reset all the values so it's zeroed. So Control A, all transforms. Then you can see it zeroes out except the dimensions. And what we can do also is Shift S, selection to cursor, make sure that it's all zeroed out. And then what we can do is now we need to create wires that connect this pole to another pole and so forth. So what I'm going to do here is Shift D to duplicate it and press X to duplicate it on the X-axis, right? And then I want to move it 50 meters away. So there's 50 meters between them. And then what I want to do is I want to create the cables, and creating the cables is actually super easy. So what we're going to do here is I'm just going to Shift right click to move the point of origin. And then I'm just going to go Shift A and then go curve. And then we're going to use a Bezier curve for this. And then you can see that there's the curve. If I press tab, then I can edit it. So I'm just going to click on the first point here, press R, Z, and then hold down Control and gradually rotate it so it's completely straight. And then we can see that this one is completely straight. So what we can do now is just go G, select it, press G on the keyboard, and press X to move it along the x-axis and have it like roughly in the center of this bar here. And then we're gonna take this guy, let it stay where it is for now. Press E to extrude, and then press X to extrude it along the x-axis. And then we're gonna set it roughly. It doesn't need to be perfect for now. So we have a connection between them, right? So we have an origin point, which is offset. We're gonna fix that in a second. First, let's make sure that these guys are centered to where they need to be, like roughly. This is the middle, so G, X, hold down Shift to make a more precise move. All right, that's this guy. I'm just holding down Shift and using the middle mouse button to scoot around the viewport. And this one's pretty good, cool. So what we can do now is press 1 on numpad to have it from a frontal view or side view because of the model. Now press G and Z and move it along the Z-axis, right? And then hold Shift again, and then have it precisely so it touches these connectors or top caps or whatever they're called. Move it slightly more. And we know that they're identical on the other side as well, so we won't actually have to check that out. So we have this Bezier curve, as you can see, selected. And now we can press go into Object, Set Origin, Origin to Geometry, because that means between these 2 points, this is the center. So with the center selected, we select our middle point we made earlier, and then just go G, X, and move the center point on the center here. Make sure it's dead center, so we can just scroll in, zoom in. G, X, hold down Shift to make it precise. I would say this is perfect. Might actually be right on the... I'm just a perfectionist, so That's why I'm just doing it like this. All right, cool. So we actually have these 3 points. This is the center of the cable, wire, whatever you want to call it. So what we want to do now is move it, because when wires move from point A to point B, there is gravity pushes them down right in the middle. If you look at references, photos online and whatnot, you will notice that. So what we can do here is basically just go G to move, and then Z to move this one singular point up and down. So I want it roughly, not too much, just a little bit to make it visible. It's roughly around here, right? And then press S to scale the handles so we can even it out. So roughly around here. Perfection. So now I'm just gonna press Z on the rotation gizmo, orientation gizmo. Press tab, so I leave edit mode. This is object mode, so you select objects. Pretty self-explanatory. And this is edit mode, so you edit your mesh or curves, whatever it may be. So essentially we're just gonna stay right here in object mode. And what I'm gonna do is press Alt D, not Shift D, but Alt D, and press Y to move it around the Y axis, and then slide it up there in the middle, you see there, and then do the same thing again, Alt D and Y, and slide it down here. So now we actually have 3 wires. If you put those in the game right now, they wouldn't be visible, and I'm going to show you in a second why and how we're going to make them visible. And the reason I'm using Alt D is because if I do anything to one of these wires, change the values, change the texture, do anything whatsoever, it will apply to all 3 wires. That's what Alt D does. It creates a duplicate that inherits everything, materials, everything whatsoever from the main one, and vice versa. But if I used Shift D, then that would just be a simple copy paste without any inheritance. So I have these guys selected now, and what I'm gonna do, just for making it easier, I'm just gonna go Control A, all transforms, and I'm gonna get an error because you see they're not zeroed out, but we can fix that. So what we're gonna do instead is Control J to join them into one singular curve, and then go Control A, all transforms, and they'll all zeroed out. Otherwise we would have to do it individually. But now we just made it into one singular curve, as you can see here. So in order to make these guys, so we can duplicate them all across, let's just go into here. This is our Bezier or curve data properties. We're gonna expand geometry here. And instead of using extrude, because here's the thing, if we're gonna use extrude, I'm just gonna show you. Oh wait, we actually need to move this guy. Oh, I messed up. All right, quick fix. Never fret, just Control Z like you know it from anywhere else. And now we have all 3 curves back, right? So what we can do is just go into the X view, G, and you can see it up here, which axis is what. So G, Y, move it dead center, roughly. There we go. Perfect. So again, select all 3, Control J, so they're joined together, Control A, and fix all transforms, so it's all zeroed out except the dimensions. And what we can do now is what I wanted to show you earlier. If I extrude this with 1.2 centimeters, then we have flat wires. Sure, it will save in terms of meshes, geometry, and whatnot, but you might risk that the textures will be visible from one side, but as soon as you drive by or whatever, they will become invisible. We don't want that. We want them to be as real as possible, but as low cost and low poly as possible. So let's reset the extrude here under geometry and offset to 0 and go down here into bevel round, and then press 1.2 centimeters. And then we have nice round cables. And I'm just gonna lower the resolution to 2, and I don't need to fill the caps, which is the end. We want them to be open. So now we have our cables, but they are still a curve, so we can't do much to them. But what we can do is, if we can change them into a mesh, and I'll show you how in a second. But first, if we want to duplicate this, so we will have these created on a terrain, so it will be like pole, cable, pole, cable, pole, cable, so forth. We need to actually take these wires here, and then we're gonna shift D to duplicate them, and press X to move them along the x-axis, and slide them out roughly around here, because then we can just zoom in, right? Press again G and X, so we move them along the x-axis. That's why you see the red line here is enabled. And then place them roughly around here, right? So what we will do now is press Tab, select the endpoints here. So we're in edit mode. That's why we press Tab. Press X, delete these vertices. Then we cut the wire in half. Now press Tab again to go into object mode, because now we need to select the second object, which is these curves here. Press Tab again, select these guys in the end here. Press delete and vertices, press Tab, we're done. Then we can take this pole and actually also delete it. We don't need it anymore. So now I'm just going to select these guys, Shift D to make a completely separate duplication. While they are all still selected, press M on the keyboard, create a new collection, and let's call it backup. It's always nice to have a backup in case you mess up. And let's just hide these guys. So now we have a curve, and we have a curve here. So we have our cables, and now we need to make them into a mesh. So what we're going to do here, while in object mode, right click and say convert to mesh. And now you see the icons here changed. This is a curve, this is a mesh. So we're going to do the same thing for these guys here. Right click, convert to mesh. So now it's a mesh, because we had these bevels made, so they're round, right? So if I press Tab, then you see we have all these vertices, faces, stuff like that, and edges. And you can switch between show vertex mode, edge mode, face mode by clicking up here, or just use 1, 2, 3 on the keyboard. All right, press Tab again, and we're essentially done. So what we're going to do now is create a material for the cables, and let's just go in here and call it cables. And select this one, and it's going to use the same material, so you can just click, instead of making a separate material, just click this one, press cables, and there you have it. So what I'm going to do now is expand my view here, and click right here where you see this crosshair, and start dragging out. If you should fail, and you know, it will do something like, let's say like this, and you know, click it by mistake and whatnot, what you can basically just do is just right click in the middle, join areas, and you want the left area to become the right area and vice versa. So you just do this, but we need that extra view instead of sitting and switching all the time. So now we have another one. Click here, shader editor, and the cables, we actually just want them to be black. So what we can do is just go into here and then write RGB, just for the sake of this tutorial, connect them into the base color, switch them to black. So they're just going to be pitch black. And here's the pole. But we already know, since we exported it right here from Giant Editor, that it's already unwrapped, as you could see. Like, everything is working, textures are working, everything is where it's supposed to be. So that should work just fine. And we also have these wires here that are using a railways diffuse map. So they're actually using railway stuff for the cables. And that's why they look rusty, because they just use metal texture for them. And these guys, we already know where the textures are. As you can see in the tooltip, maps, map US, textures, props, utility, and then props, and then utility poles, specular, utility poles, diffuse, and normal, most likely. Yep, normal. So what we actually can do is find that folder. I just copy pasted the textures out of the folder itself. But what we can do is just go into Steam, common, at least for me because it's on Steam Farming, data, maps, map US, textures, props, and then press U. And then we have, let me see, where is it? There we go, utility poles. So the beauty of Blender is we can just grab the diffuse, drag and drop it, grab the specular, but I don't want to open it, grab specular, grab it, drop it in, and same with the normal. And the diffuse just gets connected, the specular just gets connected, and then the normal is not an RGB. So we select non-color and then press Shift A, search, normal map, connect yellow to yellow, normal to normal. And then if we up here switch into shader, then we will see our pole is perfectly UV unwrapped because we took it from a giant editor. Here are our cables. We actually don't need the specular. We can drop it down a notch. And we can just add it some roughness. But what we also can do is, if you wanna, just use the rail textures, right? And there is the railroad crossing, storage, railway bridge. Let's double check what it was actually called. Map US, textures, rail tracks, and then something something. So map US textures. So if we go up here, rail tracks, and they used railway diffuse. So we can try and see how it actually looks, but I would suggest just using your own textures essentially. If you have any that you can find for wires or cables. Because if we do this, then, you know, it looks kind of blah, kind of wonky. You can do this, that you just go tab, shift, tab and then A to select all the faces, U, unwrap, and then, you know, you will still have funky stuff because the textures aren't on point. So that's why I just use an RGB for the sake of this, and then I'll search for other textures online and add those. So our pole is almost done. Now we want to create it so it's just one giant mesh. We already did a backup. Let's do a backup again. New collection, so backup like we did earlier. Now we select all three meshes, press Ctrl J, join them all together. And I actually think we did it on the wrong one. Didn't we? Or did it just refuse because we just took copy? Might have been a brain fart on my part. All right, Ctrl J again. There we go. See, now we have just one. So let's call it tutorial underscore pole. And then we can change the name of this one, which is got pole texture. There we go. And let's close this guy. We don't need this guy anymore. So we have this, and now we have one mesh. So let's join, now it's ready to use on our custom map. So what I'm gonna do now is just take this Blender file and then just save it. So we're just gonna utility poles and then tutorial pole. Save this blend file. And then what I'm gonna do is open another blend file that I already have been working on a little bit. Swiss terrain, I think it was, or let's just use this one. It might take a while to load because it's a I think it's an 8-kilometer terrain that I am working on, but we're just gonna, you know, live show you how it actually works on a custom terrain and how to apply it to a custom terrain using curves, and then exporting it and using it in Giant's editor. So here's my terrain. It's a part of Denmark, or not where I'm from, but close by. So let's do this. See it from the top. I'll do a separate video on how to create custom terrains and roads and stuff like that. But essentially, you just go into Giants Editor. You then take your terrain, right? You have it right here. Take your terrain, and then you can just export it. But what you need to remember when you export things is this: preferences and scale to 1, and then frustum cold. Remove frustum cold and set the scale to 1, so it doesn't mess things up. So what you do is select your terrain, as I mentioned, and then you can just export selection, and again select it as a obj, and then call it terrain, export it. It takes a while depending on how big your terrain is. Like 8-kilometer terrains and bigger, they take a shit ton of time to export. Like nothing compared to the pole that we exported. So might as well start the export, go take a coffee, do some lunch, kiss your kids, whatever it is that you need to do. And then you essentially just import the terrain, and if you have satellite image or data, then you just apply it as a plane, added some texture, which is satellite image, as you can see here, and then it just works out the box. So that was a really short introduction, because again, if you're here, you already know how to do this. So you're just interested in how to adding these poles to your terrain. So we have our cursor here. So what we're gonna do now is go in here and then press Shift A, curve, and then let's use path curve. You can use Bezier, you can use path, but I suggest like use whichever makes you like more comfortable to work with. And as you can see, it doesn't show up. That's because our plane is covering it, as you can see right here. So what we can do in that case is just move it up. So when we enable the plane, we don't need the elevation terrain. We are actually just interested in the satellite image itself. So curve selected, we have it right here. Press tab to edit it, and then let's move the points into place. So we have one point here. Let's drag the other one down here. And again, I'm using doing everything from the z-axis, as because if I use any other, they won't be completely zeroed in elevation, because I'll show you why in a bit. So G, move this over here, because that's roughly where the road is going to be. Take this guy, G, roughly around here. Press G. And yeah, we don't use utility poles in Denmark. At least I haven't seen any in a long, long while. Everything is ground-based. But this is just for the sake of the tutorial. In case someone is like, we don't use these in Denmark. Yeah, I know. Press E again, and then drag another one out here. E is for extruding, right? So we might actually want to use this one over here somewhere, and then use this one, and then again E, and then E, right? And the black line is actually where the curve is going to be. So if I move this guy over here and then move this guy here, then we have a cleaner curve. And as you can see, they're completely flat, because if I was to extrude and then do it like this, for instance, and you're thinking, oh, okay, this looks good. Yeah, but it's not, you know, straight or anything like that. So we have our extrusion, our curve right here. So how do we import our pole on top of this? The best way to do it is actually when you have Blender down here, just right click it open Blender again. Takes a while. There I have it. Just gonna move it over here. And then open up recent, and that's we have our tutorial poll, right? With all the textures and everything. And then just Control C, and then it will say down here, copied one selected object, and tab over into your project, Control V, and it will insert it down where it was on your map, right? You see it down there. So we have our tutorial poll, and what we want to do is Control A to apply, and then apply all transforms. So as you can see, it's zeroed out over here. And then what we can do is press on our tutorial poll, click on the wrench to add a modifier. And then what we're going to do is add an array modifier, and I'll show you what it does. If I zoom down here, pressed 1 to see it from the side, and then that's the issue with large maps. Movement. There we go. So array essentially copies, and you can see like I made 45 copies of this one singular mesh. So if I say 4, then you will see they also perfectly connect. There are no issues whatsoever. So it's amazeballs. But what we really want to do, pardon me, is go into fit curve. And this one is called NURBS path. We can actually, if we enable it and then rename it, or we can rename it yet because it's, no, there we go. It was just a bit sluggish. So call it electrical, or no, wait, utility poles underscore 01, for instance, right? So we're going to take our tutorial pole, fit curve, and then utility poles 1. It will fit the length of the entire curve. And then what we also need is a curve modifier to use it on our curve. But first of all, if we select this utility poles, we will see the transform that we moved it 1000 meters above. That's why it's up there. So what we want to do is also zero that one. So all transforms, Control A. So now it's 0, 0, 0 all across except the dimensions. So we take this guy, object, set origin, origin to geometry, make sure everything is tip-top shape. And then we're gonna, oh no, sorry, I messed up. Yeah, we don't need that. We already zeroed it. Sorry. We already zeroed that one out. So 0, 0, 0, we only have the dimensions. And now if we have this curve modifier back here that we applied, this one, add modifier curve, right? So now we select our utility pole curve and it vanished because they're all up there. So we scroll up, right? See it from the top and then enable our plane. It follows along just nicely. Sure, there might be some wrinkles here because of the turn. And if that bugs you too much, what you can actually do is just press G and then X and then slide it along. So you have the pole in here instead. Entirely up to you, but you can play around with it. So now that pole is done, right? Completely ready and everything. And if you want to fit it so it follows the terrain now, so what we can do is click this curve here, utility pole curve, also give it a modifier called shrink wrap. So it wraps to your terrain and it needs a target. And for this, we are going to use extracted FS terrain. And it might lag a little bit. There we go. Let's kill the other blender. We actually don't need it anymore. There we go. So because the terrain here in Denmark is relatively flat-ish, but you can see it actually does like move up and down in certain areas. So what we're gonna do here is click on the utility pole curve, right? And then we already slammed it into the surface, and then we're gonna apply this, apply on spline, right? And you see it vanished, but no worries, because if we hide the satellite image, then we see that it's actually because it is following our terrain. You see? So it's essentially just following the curves of the terrain and the way the terrain moves up and down. And that's it. So what we now can do, because we're only interested in our terrain here, and the terrain is already like smack dab on top of the curve. So we can just click on the tutorial pole, the one that we made, and you can see how it curves now up and down and whatnot. Just click on it, and then you would want to think you need to export it as an OBJ. You don't, because we need it as an i3D. So what we're going to do is open the i3D exporter. And because we're on our tutorial map, then again, we need to find the farming simulator folder, then go into materials, get the shaders. There we go. Everything is good. And then what we also can do is, I mean, we can write an XML file. So the i3D will load the textures from the correct folders and whatnot. So we can just do that. It will write it into the i3D. Sorry, I'm just brain farting right now. So tired after re-recording this 3 times now. Anyway, I digress. Use Blender file name. We don't need that. We're just going to save it separately. And let's go into our tutorials, polls, and then just go utility poll. Set i3D. And then it will say that we changed it. That's all good. Export is selected. And will take a while. And it is Blender after all, so it might, you know, do not responding and whatnot, but it will work. Success, export time 12 seconds. Cool. So we can actually close down this Blender file, jump into Giants Editor, and then let's open up the i3D file. So we're gonna do polls, and then we have utility poll i3D. And then you're thinking, where is it? Like, it's missing. And it's just because the way we remember the elevation and whatnot. That's why it looks wonky. But let's say we imported our terrain, then it will follow the terrain perfectly everywhere. And you can also see that it took our textures with it. The only thing it didn't take with it is the cables. But what we can actually do, like, here's the thing. The cables are black, so in essence, all you would need is a black texture. But for the sake of this tutorial, we didn't UV unwrap or anything like that. That's why I'm saying, you know, just use a pitch black texture with like super low res. It doesn't really matter. Because if we just use utility poles just for the sake of this, then, you know, it would look like kinda iffy. Let me scroll down the navigation speed on minus on the numpad. Then you see it looks kinda wonky. But yeah, the main tutorial for this was to see and show how you can take tutorial poles into Blender, export them with cables. use a spline, apply it to your own terrain. I'm gonna make a separate terrain on like texturing, UV unwrapping, and whatnot. And here's the pole we didn't move earlier. But yeah, that was it, guys. If you have any questions, write down below. And to you that know where I hang out on Discord, catch me there. That was it. It was just a random tutorial to, get you guys started, figure out what is what. I hope you found it helpful, and most importantly, like, try it, because it's really not that hard. It doesn't require much skill. Just try it out. Don't be afraid to use Blender and use a bunch of other tools. That's it. Have fun.